Hello everyone, welcome to Reactify Labs. Today we will talk about stored procedures. Stored procedures. So this is something you must have studied in your databases subject, database course during your undergrad or grad. So you might ask why stored procedures here? Because it's as much important in system design as it is in database. Because in the last video I talked about how Debezium takes the change data, does the change data capturing from the database and sends it to whatever destination it has, right? And in that I mentioned that Debezium might be using some kind of stored procedure to do the CDC, right? So that's why stored procedure is important. And in this video, we will talk about stored procedures. So, mm, uh, how to understand stored procedure in a very simple language. So let me try to explain it using some real life example so that even a 6-year-old can understand. Okay. So let's say you go to a restaurant. Hmm? You go to a restaurant. Okay. Then in that restaurant kitchen, chefs are there, right? Let's say they have a recipe book. So actually they don't have a recipe book, but let's assume, because for the chefs it might be like it's all in their mind because they have now memorized it. But initially they would have referred to some recipe book, because if you go to some big restaurants, like if it's a chain, okay, if it's a chain of restaurants, then what happens is they try to make sure that the taste of their food is same throughout the world. So for that they have a recipe book in which they have explicitly mentioned the ingredients and the proportion in which it should be used, so that if a person eats in India or in US or in Australia, everywhere they will get the same taste, right? So that's why chefs have a recipe book. So each recipe in this book is like a stored procedure. Okay, each recipe, let's say there is a recipe for lasagna lasagna recipe. So this recipe is like a stored procedure. It contains a set of instructions on how to prepare a specific dish. Okay, so each recipe provides a precise set of steps like ingredients, cooking, etc. that the chefs follow. Similarly, a stored procedure contains predefined SQL commands that the database executes. So this recipe book has for each recipe steps. Similarly, database has commands which need to be executed. Okay, so these commands are called stored procedures. Okay, so I hope this gives you a good idea of what stored procedure is. So basically stored procedure is like a command which we tell the database to execute. Like in the restaurant, when somebody places an order, this customer places an order. So this customer places an order. The chef refers to the recipe book for that order and gives the order to the customer. Here again we have a customer which does something, which wants something. Okay, like the customer wants something from the database. So that something triggers this database and asks the database to execute the command, which is the stored procedure, and then return it to the customer. Okay, so if we have to talk in more detail about it, when a customer places an order, which is equivalent to calling a stored procedure, the kitchen doesn't need to figure out the recipe from scratch. Similarly, the database does not need to go and search for how to do that or make everything from scratch, right? Instead, the chef follows the recipe from the book, which means executing the stored procedure to prepare the dish. Because the recipe is standardized and pre-written, the process is efficient and consistent. Similarly, stored procedures are pre-compiled, allowing the database to execute them quickly and consistently. But there is some security aspect also associated with stored procedures. Not everyone in the restaurant has access to the kitchen or the recipe book. Only authorized chefs can prepare dishes. In the same way, stored procedures control access to database operations. allowing only authorized users or applications to execute them. Then let's say if the restaurant decides to change a recipe, okay, which is equivalent to updating a stored procedure, the chef only needs to refer to the updated recipe book. All chefs will then use the new recipe book. This is similar to updating a stored procedure where changes are made in one place and all users or applications calling the procedure will benefit from the update. Okay. But let's say there are some complex dishes that require multiple steps. Similarly, there will be complex stored procedures which have multiple steps to execute. Then recipe book ensures that each step is executed in order. Similarly, stored procedures can encapsulate complex business logic and multiple SQL operations also, ensuring they are executed as a single unit of work. Okay. So now that we know what stored procedures are at a very high level in a layman term, so let's discuss the structure that we are going to follow today. So we will start with the introduction of stored procedures. Then we will talk about how they work. Then we will see their benefits. Next, we will see the usage scenarios where stored procedures are used. Okay. Then we will talk about the advantages and then challenges associated with stored procedures. By the way, there is a disclaimer here. If you have stumbled upon this video and are looking for how to write SQL statements for stored procedures, then please you can drop now if you want, because in this video I'm not going to talk about how to write SQL commands. Right? In this video I'm going to talk about the concept behind stored procedures. So if you want, you can drop now because there will be no SQL statements here. Okay. So now that we are ready, let's start with the introduction of stored procedures. So, stored procedures are pre-compiled collections of one or more SQL statements. Pre-compiled collections of one or more SQL statements stored and executed on the database server. Stored and executed on the database server. They are used to perform a variety of tasks, including data manipulation, retrieval, and administrative operations. Stored procedures encapsulate logic and can be invoked by applications, users, or other procedures. Okay. So if we have to define a stored procedure, it is a named set of SQL statements that can be executed as a single unit. It is stored in the database and can be called or executed by an application, user, or another stored procedure. As I mentioned, if there is a complex stored procedure which has to trigger some other stored procedures, it can also be done. Okay. Now let's see how they work. How stored procedures work. So first step is creation and storage. Stored procedures are defined using SQL commands and are saved within the database schema. The definition includes the SQL code that performs the desired operation. Once created, stored procedures are stored in the database metadata. They are compiled into an executable form, which improves performance by eliminating the need to parse and compile SQL code every time it is executed. Next is execution. Stored procedures are executed by specifying their name and providing any required parameters. Execution can be initiated from an application, a command line tool, or another stored procedure. Stored procedures can accept input parameters, output parameters, and return values. Parameters allow passing data to and from the procedure, making it flexible and reusable. Okay. And next is result handling. So, stored procedures can return result sets or scalar values. The results can be used by applications or other processes. Stored procedures often include error handling mechanisms to manage exceptions and provide informative error messages. Okay. Now let's see what are the benefits of stored procedures. Performance improvement. performance improvement. So stored procedures are pre-compiled, reducing the overhead of parsing and compiling SQL code. This leads to faster execution compared to ad hoc SQL queries. Executing a stored procedure involves sending a signal command to the database server, reducing network traffic compared to sending multiple separate queries. Okay. Next is code reusability. Code reusability. So stored procedures encapsulate business logic and SQL code, allowing it to be reused across different applications or parts of an application. Code changes can be made in one place, thus avoiding the need to update multiple application layers. You can only update the stored procedure and it will be reflected everywhere. Next is security. Stored procedures provide an additional layer of security by allowing users to execute predefined operations without giving them direct access to the underlying tables. Permissions can be set to restrict access to sensitive data or operations, ensuring that users only perform authorized actions. Okay. And next is maintenance. Business logic and data manipulation rules are centralized in stored procedures, making them easier to maintain and update. And changes to procedures can be version controlled and tested independently of application code. Okay. Next, let's see the usage scenarios where stored procedures can be used. Usage scenarios. First is data validation. Data validation. Enforcing data validation rules and constraints within a stored procedure to ensure that only valid data is inserted or updated in the database. Okay. Next is complex transactions. Performing complex transactions involving multiple operations that need to be executed as a single unit of work is also done by stored procedure. For example, let's say transferring funds between two different accounts. These are achieved by stored procedures. And batch processing. Executing batch operations or scheduled tasks such as generating monthly reports or processing large volumes of data, they also utilize stored procedures. Okay. Next, let's talk about the advantages of stored procedures. So first is, I think we have already talked about the benefits, right? Then yeah, I don't think we need this. We have already covered in benefits section. Let's see the challenges. Challenges associated with stored procedures. So the first challenge is complexity. Managing and maintaining a large number of stored procedures can become complex, especially in large systems. Next is vendor lock-in. Vendor lock-in. Okay. So stored procedures are often written in database specific dialects. So it's not independent of the language or the database you're using, right? So for example, for Oracle, we have PLSQL. For SQL Server, we have TSQL. Different dialects for different kinds of databases, right? Which can lead to vendor lock-in. Means depending on the vendor of your database, you have to write your stored procedure. Okay. And debugging. So debugging stored procedures can be challenging compared to application code, especially when dealing with complex logic or interactions. Okay, so yeah, that's all there was about stored procedures. So yeah, I hope you now have a good understanding of what are stored procedures and why they are used, what are the benefits of using them. And now in the Debezium, when I said it uses stored procedures for the change data capture, now you can also relate how Debezium utilizes this. Okay, so yeah, that was all there in this video. Yep, that's all. So yeah, thank you for watching. Please remember to like, share and subscribe. I will see you in the next one.